Just checking in, the email read. Haven't kicked the bucket yet, have you? The words came from my son, Mark, all the way from Australia. My computer screen glowed in the dim living room. The hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound. I put my finger on the screen, right on the words. It felt cold. I closed the laptop. My tea was sitting on the end table, untouched. The steam had stopped rising. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece. There was a photo of Mark and Jessica, taken 20 years ago at their father's funeral. They were standing on either side of me, holding my hands. Their faces were sad, but they looked like good children. Strong children. I'd made sure of that. I remember when Jessica wanted to go to that fancy college on the East Coast. Her father's insurance money was supposed to be for my old age. "It's an investment in my future, Mum," she'd said. "It's an investment in the family." I wrote the check. The money was gone in 4 years. I went into the kitchen. The linoleum was cool under my slippers. I poured the cold tea down the drain and ran the water for a fresh cup. The little gas flame on the stove popped to life with a soft whoosh. It was a comforting sound. I had my social security. I had my little house. I had my memories. I thought that was enough. A few days later, another email arrived. This one was from Jessica. The subject line was just house. I clicked it open. She said they'd been looking at property values in my area. She said the market was good. It would be a shame to let the house fall into disrepair, she wrote. Have you thought about what will happen to it? I thought about the house. I thought about the pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen, measuring their height every year. Mark's line shot up so fast. Jessica's was always a little behind. I thought about the leaky faucet I'd finally paid the plumber to fix last month. That was half my grocery money, but the dripping had stopped. I remembered sending Mark $5,000 when he moved to Sydney. He said it was a deposit for an apartment, a fresh start. I saw pictures on his Facebook page a month later. He was on a boat with a beautiful girl, the sun shining on the water behind them. The caption said, "Best vacation ever." I never asked him about the apartment. "Is the heat working okay, Mum?" he'd asked on a brief phone call last Christmas. "It's fine, honey. A little noisy, but it works," I told him. I didn't mention I kept the thermostat at 62 degrees and wore my thick cardigan indoors. There was no point in worrying him. He had his own life to live. A big, sunny life, far away from my little drafty house. The first snow came in November. It was beautiful at first, big fluffy flakes drifting past the window. By morning, it was a blizzard. The wind howled like a hungry animal. My little house shuddered. The television news showed cars stuck on the highway and warned everyone to stay inside. My driveway was a solid sheet of white. I knew the snowplow wouldn't come down my lane for days. I made myself some oatmeal and sat by the window watching the storm. The power flickered once, twice, then went out. The silence was sudden and heavy. I found my candles and the old battery-powered radio. The radio announcer's calm voice filled the kitchen. He talked about road closures and emergency shelters. Around noon, I heard a sound. A low rumbling, getting closer. I pulled my shawl tighter and peered through the frosted glass of the front door. It was the mail truck, somehow pushing its way through the deep snow. It stopped at the end of my drive. A figure in a heavy blue coat got out. It was Dave, my mailman for the last 10 years. He was carrying a grocery bag. "Mrs. Gable?" he called out, his voice muffled by the wind. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right in this mess." "Dave, you shouldn't be out in this," I shouted back, opening the door just a crack. The cold air bit at my face. "My mom lives alone out on the county line. he said, handing me the bag. I'd hoped someone would do the same for her. Got you some milk and bread. And the paper. For 3 days, the snow kept us locked in. And for 3 days, Dave came. He brought me my prescriptions from the pharmacy in town. His wife, Mary, sent over a hot casserole in a glass dish. It smelled of beef and noodles and love. The warmth of the dish spread through my hands as I carried it to the kitchen. I sat at my little table, eating the hot food right from the dish. The house was cold, but the casserole warmed me from the inside out. I looked at my laptop, sitting dark and silent on the counter. I thought about my children's emails, one asking if I was dead, one asking about my house. Dave stood on my porch, stomping the snow from his boots. Mary says to keep the dish, he said with a smile. She has too many of them anyway. Please thank her for me, Dave, I said. It was the best meal I've had in a long time. No trouble at all, Mrs. Gable. You just take care of yourself. He tipped his hat and crunched back through the snow to his truck. I watched until the red taillights disappeared. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely. When the sun finally came out, the world was covered in a thick blanket of sparkling white. The silence was peaceful. The storm had passed, both outside and inside me. I felt a strange calm, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I went to my husband's old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room. The wood smelled of polish and old paper. I rolled up the top and pulled out my good stationery, the kind with the little bluebirds printed in the corner. Then I took out the heavy town phone book. I ran my finger down the listings under attorneys. I picked up the phone. The dial tone was a steady, reassuring hum. Henderson? Black and Associates, a crisp voice answered. Hello? I said, my own voice clear and strong. I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Henderson. It's about changing my will. I hung up the phone and looked over at the laptop. I thought of Mark's question. Haven't kicked the bucket yet, have you? A small smile touched my lips. No, I hadn't. I was just getting started. Mr. Henderson's office smelled of old books and lemon polish. A tall clock in the corner ticked a slow, steady rhythm. He was a man my husband had trusted. He had kind eyes and a fringe of white hair around his bald head. He folded his hands on his big mahogany desk and looked at me over his glasses. Eleanor, he said, his voice gentle. You want to leave your entire estate to David Miller? Your mail carrier? That's right, I said. I held my purse tight in my lap. The leather was worn and soft. The house, the savings, everything. And your children? Mark and Jessica? He asked, shuffling some papers. He already knew the answer. My children have their own lives in Australia, I said. They are quite successful. They don't need my little house. I thought of their emails, their casual cruelty, but I didn't say that. There was no need. Mr. Henderson just nodded slowly, watching my face. He didn't judge. He just listened. After I signed the papers, I walked out into the pale winter sunlight. The air was crisp and clean. I felt lighter than I had in years. It was like I'd put down a heavy bag I didn't even know I was carrying. The church bells from St. Mary's began to ring for noon, a sound I'd heard my whole life. Today, it sounded like freedom. I decided to treat myself, so I went to the diner on Main Street. I sat in a red vinyl booth and ordered a coffee and a slice of apple pie. The waitress, a young girl named Jenny, put it in front of me with a smile. The pie was warm, smelling of cinnamon, and the coffee was black and strong. Everything okay for you today, Mrs. Gable? She asked, refilling my cup. Everything is just perfect, Jenny, I told her. And for the first time in a long time, it was the honest truth. I watched the people passing by on the sidewalk outside the big window. They were all living their lives. I decided it was time I started living mine again, too. A week later, I was in the produce aisle at the grocery store, trying to decide between the green beans and the asparagus, when I heard a familiar voice. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you." It was Mary, Dave's wife. She was holding a carton of eggs in her hand, and her smile was as warm as the casserole she'd sent. "Mary, hello," I said, my own smile coming easily. "I've been meaning to call you. That casserole was a lifesaver." "Oh, nonsense," she said, waving a hand. "Dave worries, you know. He said that lane of yours gets hit the worst when the snow comes. He says you remind him of his own mother, living all by herself." She patted my arm. Her touch was warm and genuine. We stood there for a few minutes, talking about the price of lettuce and the cold weather that was coming. It was simple. It was nice. Another email from Jessica landed in my inbox. The subject was "Urgent Family Matter." My heart did a little flip, the old habit of worry. I clicked it open. It was a long message about a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. It involved organic dog treats. It ended with a request for $20,000. She called it a short-term loan. "Think of it as an advance on my inheritance," she wrote. I read the sentence twice. An advance on my inheritance. My house. My husband's pension. The money I lived on, carefully, from one social security check to the next. It wasn't an inheritance. It was my life. I closed the laptop without replying. I went to the living room and picked up my knitting. The soft wool ran through my fingers, and the wooden needles made a quiet, clicking sound. Click, click, click. It was a sound of making something, not of taking something. I sat there for a long time, just knitting, as the afternoon sun slanted through the window. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the computer. I opened the email from Jessica again. I read it one last time. Then I clicked reply. My fingers felt steady on the keyboard. I wrote, "Dear Jessica, I hope you are well. I'm afraid I cannot help you with a loan. All the best with your new business. Love, Mom." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The email was gone, flying across the world to Australia. I felt no anger, no sadness, just a quiet finality. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove past on the street. I took a sip of my coffee. It was a perfectly ordinary morning, and that felt wonderful. Jessica's reply came 2 days later. It was short. "Mum, I'm disappointed," she wrote. "I thought you'd be proud to invest in your family's future. I hope you're feeling all right. Maybe you should have a doctor check your memory." I read the words about my memory. I looked around my clean, orderly kitchen. I could smell the toast I'd made for breakfast. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. My memory was fine. I remembered every sacrifice, every check I'd written, every lonely holiday. I deleted her email. Then I emptied the trash folder on the computer. The little icon of a wastebasket was satisfying. I put on my coat and my good winter boots. It was time for my walk. The cold air felt good on my face. Mary had invited me to her church quilting group. "We just sit and sew and gossip," she'd said with a laugh. "You'd love it." I hadn't sewn anything in 30 years, but I went. The church basement smelled of stale coffee and Murphy's oil soap. A dozen women sat around long tables covered in colourful fabric scraps. They welcomed me right in. A woman named Carol showed me how to thread the needle on a new sewing machine. The hum of the machine was steady and comforting. My stitches were crooked at first, but no one cared. They were too busy talking about their grandchildren and a new recipe for lemon bars. "So, Eleanor, do you have family nearby? A woman named Susan asked, holding a piece of blue calico up to the light. No, I said, concentrating on a long, straight seam. My children live very far away. And for the first time, saying it didn't leave a hollow space in my chest. It was just a fact, like the color of the fabric or the hum of the machine. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Mark. His voice was smooth and cheerful, the way it always was when he wanted something. We talked about the weather in Sydney. We talked about the weather here. Then he got to the point. So, Mom, he said, Jess tells me you're not feeling too well. I feel fine, Mark, I said, watching a squirrel run along the fence outside my window. That's good. That's good, he said quickly. Listen, I was thinking, that big house must be a lot for you to handle. All alone. We could sell it, get you into a nice modern condo. No stairs, no yard work. You'd have a nice little nest egg left over. A nest egg. For him and Jessica to borrow from. I stayed quiet. The silence stretched over the thousands of miles between us. Mum? Are you there? He asked. Did you hear what I said? I heard him. He thought I was a child who needed managing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs and pulled out the old photo albums. The pages were stiff and smelled of cardboard and time. There they were, Mark and Jessica on their first day of school, with missing teeth and big, hopeful smiles. I found a box of old papers, report cards with gold stars, a little clay handprint Jessica made me for Mother's Day. I also found the bank statements, the withdrawal for Jessica's college, the wire transfer to Mark in Sydney, the receipts for cars and braces and summer camps. I had given them everything I could. I had been a good mother. I ran my finger over a picture of their smiling faces. It hit me then, a thought so clear and sharp, it felt like a piece of glass in my heart. I wasn't a mother anymore, just an inheritance with a heartbeat. I closed the album. I put the box of papers away. I went to the window and looked out at the quiet, moonlit street. The feeling wasn't sadness. It was peace. The peace of a final decision, correctly made. The next morning, I was sweeping the snow off my front steps when Dave's mail truck pulled up. He got out, holding a small package and a few letters. He walked carefully up my icy path. "Morning, Mrs. Gable," he said, handing me the mail. "Be careful on these steps." He pointed with his chin at the wooden handrail next to me. "That post is a little wobbly. Let me take a look." Before I could say a word, he went back to his truck and came back with a screwdriver. In 2 minutes, he had tightened the loose screws. He gave the post a good shake. It was solid as a rock. "There you go," he said, smiling. "Wouldn't want you to take a tumble." He didn't ask for a thing. He just saw a problem and fixed it. I stood there on my porch, holding my mail, and watched him drive away. Some people give you their time. Others just tell you what yours is worth. Spring came slowly, melting the snow in muddy patches. The first crocuses pushed their purple heads through the cold earth in my garden. I felt like one of them. I had an appointment with Mr. Fields at the town bank, the same one my husband and I had used for 40 years. The bank was quiet, smelling of clean money and floor wax. Mr. Fields led me into his glass-walled office. He had a kind, serious face. I had brought all my papers in my big leather tote bag, the deed to the house, my savings account passbook, my late husband's pension documents. "Eleanor, this is a significant step," he said, looking at the papers spread between us on his polished desk. "Setting up a trust is irreversible." "I know what it means, Robert," I said. My voice was calm. I looked at my hands, resting on the worn handles of my bag. They were old hands, spotted and wrinkled, but they were steady. It's exactly what I want to do. A week later, I agreed to a video call with Mark and Jessica. It was morning for me, evening for them. Their faces appeared on my computer screen, a little blurry and delayed. They were in a bright, modern kitchen that looked like it came from a magazine. "Mum, you look tired," Jessica said immediately. She wasn't looking at my face, but somewhere over my shoulder. "Is the house dark?" "It's a cloudy day, dear," I said. "We've been talking," Mark jumped in. "We found a wonderful real estate agent in your area. Her name is Brenda. She specializes in getting seniors into more manageable properties." He smiled, a big white smile. He thought he was being helpful. He thought I was a problem to be solved. "I'm not a property mark," I said softly. "What was that, Mum?" he asked, leaning closer to his screen. "The connection is a bit fuzzy." I said, "I like my house," I repeated, a little louder. I saw Jessica roll her eyes at him when she thought I wasn't looking. "I have to go. My pot roast is in the oven." I clicked the red end call button before they could say another word. The screen went black. The silence in my living room was a relief. At the quilting group the next Thursday, I was working on a square with a yellow sun in the middle. My stitches were getting better. They were small and even. Carol sat next to me, her needle flying. "You're quiet today, Eleanor," she said, not looking up from her work. The room was filled with the soft snip of scissors and easy chatter. "Just thinking," I said. I held up my square. "What do you think of this yellow?" "It's cheerful," she said with a smile. "It's a hopeful color." She patted my hand. "Whatever you're thinking about, I hope it's something cheerful too." I looked around the room at the faces of these women. We were all widows or grandmothers. We were piecing together scraps to make something warm and beautiful. I smiled back at her. "It is," I said. "It really is." The next day, Dave brought a package to the door. It was heavy. He helped me carry it inside to the kitchen table. "Looks like books," he said, setting it down gently. It was from my book club. "Would you like a glass of iced tea, Dave?" "I just made a fresh pitcher," I offered. It was the first warm day of the year. He took off his cap and wiped his brow. "I'd love one, Mrs. Gable. Thank you." As I poured the tea, he talked about his oldest son, Michael. He was a senior in high school. "He's smart as a whip," Dave said, a proud father's glow on his face. "Got into the state university. We're so proud, but, well, tuition these days." He sighed and took a long drink of tea. "I'm sure you'll manage," I said. "You're good people." "We always do," he said, finishing his glass. "Well, back to the root. Thank you for the tea, ma'am." After he left, I went to my husband's desk. I found a crisp $100 bill I'd been saving for an emergency. I put it in a clean white envelope. The following Monday, I left the envelope in my mailbox, tucked inside a thank you card. On the front, I wrote Dave Miller. Inside, I wrote, "For Michael's books. A boy that's smart deserves a good start." I watched from my window as he opened the box. He took out the card and read it. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. Then he looked toward my house. I stepped back from the window so he couldn't see me. He put the card in his shirt pocket, closed the mailbox door, and continued on his route. An email pinged on my computer. The subject line from Mark read, "Contact info for Brenda." I looked at it, then went to the kitchen to water my African violets on the windowsill. The flowers were a deep, rich purple. They were alive and growing under my care. I didn't need to open the email. I already knew everything it had to say. Summer arrived, hot and thick. The hum of the air conditioner filled the house. I spent my mornings in the garden, pulling weeds and tending my tomatoes. My knees ached, but the smell of the warm earth and the sight of new growth made it worthwhile. Dave didn't mention the $100, but every few days, a little something extra would appear with my mail. A bag of ripe tomatoes from his own garden, left on the porch rail. A copy of a magazine he thought I'd like. Small things. Quiet things. It was a language of kindness we both understood without needing to speak it. One afternoon, he knocked on the door. He wasn't in his uniform. He held a plate covered in aluminum foil. "Mary made lemon bars," he said, a little shyly. "She sent one over for you." "Dave, you both are too good to me," I said, taking the plate. The foil was still warm. "It's nothing, Mrs. Gable," he said, looking at my rose bushes. "You've got the best roses on my whole route, you know that?" He wasn't asking for anything. He was just a good man, noticing a nice thing. I received a registered letter. The envelope was stiff and official-looking. It was from a law firm in Sydney. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Inside, the language was cold and legal. Mark and Jessica were petitioning for power of attorney over my affairs. They cited my advancing age and increasing isolation. They said I was vulnerable to exploitation. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter in my hand. Exploitation. The word was ugly. I thought of the $20,000 Jessica wanted for her dog treats. I thought of Mark wanting me to sell my home for a nest egg. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to get louder. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Henderson. "George?" I said, my voice steady. "They've started." "I expected they would, Eleanor." His voice was calm and reassuring. "Don't you worry. We're ready for them. Just forward me a copy of that letter." I felt a wave of relief. I wasn't alone in this. The next week was the annual church potluck. The hall was noisy and smelled of fried chicken and baked beans. I brought a macaroni and cheese casserole, using my mother's old recipe. I saw Mary and Dave Miller there with their son, Michael. Mary gave me a big hug. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you came. Come, I want you to meet Michael." He was a tall, polite boy with his father's kind eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am," he said, shaking my hand. "My dad talks about you all the time. Thank you for the book money. It really helped." He was a good boy. You could just tell. "You're very welcome, Michael," I said. "Work hard in school." I watched him go back to his friends. I saw Dave watching me, a look of deep gratitude on his face. He just gave a small nod. That was enough. The video calls from Australia became more frequent, more insistent. Jessica's face was tight with frustration. Mark tried to sound reasonable and calm, but I could see the anger in his eyes. "Mum, this Brenda is a top agent," he said, holding up a brochure to the camera. "She has a lovely 2-bedroom condo for you. It's in a wonderful senior community. They have a pool." "I don't swim, Mark," I said, sipping my tea. "It's about the principle, Mom," Jessica cut in, her voice sharp. "We're trying to take care of you and you're being difficult. We're worried you'll fall, or that someone will take advantage of you." There was that phrase again. Take advantage. I looked at their two faces, so far away, so full of their own needs. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their inheritance slipping away. I stayed quiet. My silence was the one thing they couldn't argue with. I had another meeting with Mr. Henderson. He had the letter from Australia on his desk. He had already drafted a response. It was firm, polite, and legally solid. We have medical records stating you are of sound mind, he explained, tapping a folder. We have bank records showing you manage your own finances perfectly well. They don't have a case, Eleanor. Good, I said. It was all I needed to hear. As I was leaving, he walked me to the door. You know, he said, adjusting his glasses, in 40 years of practicing law, I've learned one thing. The quietest people often have the most to say. I walked out into the summer afternoon. The sun was warm on my back. I thought about what he said. I wasn't being quiet anymore. I was just speaking a language my children had forgotten how to hear. The leaves began to turn, painting the town in shades of gold and red. The air grew crisp. My 75th birthday was approaching. I decided I didn't want to spend it alone, watching the television. I wanted to celebrate. I went to the little print shop on Main Street and had invitations made. They were simple, on thick, cream-coloured paper. I invited the ladies from my quilting group. I invited Mary and Dave Miller and their son. I invited Mr. Henderson and his wife. I planned a small luncheon in my own home. Mary offered to help me cook. Nonsense, Eleanor, she said when I tried to refuse. You can't do everything yourself. Let your friends help you. The word friends felt warm and solid. It was a good feeling. The day of the party, my house was filled with warmth and the smell of roasting chicken. The low murmur of happy conversation was a sound I hadn't heard in these rooms for a very long time. Carol from the quilting group brought a beautiful quilt she'd made for me as a gift. It was covered in yellow suns. A little something to keep you warm this winter, she said, wrapping it around my shoulders. The fabric was soft and heavy. Dave and Mary gave me a framed photograph of my rose bushes, taken in the peak of their summer bloom. So you can enjoy them all year, Dave said. It was a thoughtful gift, a gift from someone who paid attention. I put it on the mantelpiece, right where the old photo of Mark and Jessica used to be. My phone rang in the middle of the party. I saw the Australian country code and let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, it buzzed with a text message from Jessica. Happy birthday, Mum. We sent you an e-card. We tried to call. An e-card. I thought about the warm quilt around my shoulders. I looked at the faces of the people laughing in my living room. I didn't bother checking my email. I knew what the card would look like. It would be generic. It would play a little tinny song. It would be sent from a great distance, in every possible way. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I listened to the voicemail. Mum, it's Mark. Happy birthday, his voice said, sounding rushed. Listen, we need to talk about this legal nonsense. You need to stop this. You're embarrassing the family. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't wish me a good day. He just gave an order. A week later, I was having my annual checkup with Dr. Adams. He was a young doctor, but he was thorough. He listened to my heart. He checked my blood pressure. He asked me questions about my sleep and my diet. You're in remarkable health, Eleanor, he said, smiling as he looked at my chart. Blood pressure is perfect. Heart is strong. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I joined a quilting group, I told him. He laughed. Well, it's clearly good for you. He wrote a note on his letterhead, confirming I was in excellent health and fully capable of making my own decisions. I asked his receptionist to fax a copy to Mr. Henderson's office. It was another piece of the puzzle, clicking neatly into place. Another official-looking letter arrived. This time, it was from my own lawyer. It was a formal notice of a family meeting to be conducted via video conference. Mr. Henderson had scheduled it. My attendance was required. The purpose was stated clearly. to discuss Mrs. Eleanor Gable's long-term financial planning and final estate. I called Mr. Henderson. George, is this really necessary? I asked. The thought of seeing their faces again, of hearing their arguments, made me tired. It is, Eleanor, he said, his voice firm but kind. It's better to settle this now on your terms, while you're here to speak for yourself. It's time they understood the situation, clearly and finally. I looked out the window at the last of the autumn leaves, clinging to the branches. He was right. A storm was coming, and it was better to face it than to hide from it. All right, George, I said. Let's get it over with. The day of the video conference, I sat in Mr. Henderson's office. The room was the same, smelling of old books and polish. The tall clock ticked its steady rhythm. I wore my good blue dress and a string of my mother's pearls. I felt calm. Mr. Henderson sat beside me, a neat stack of files on the desk in front of him. The laptop screen flickered to life. Mark and Jessica appeared, sitting side by side on a white sofa. A man in a suit I didn't recognize sat in a chair next to them. He was their lawyer. His face was sharp and impatient. Good morning, Mr. Henderson said, his voice filling the quiet room. Thank you for joining us. This is Eleanor Gable. I am her attorney, George Henderson. Let's get straight to it, George, Mark said, leaning forward. We're very concerned about my mother's well-being and her finances. Jessica nodded beside him, her arms crossed tightly. Mr. Henderson began to speak. He was calm and methodical. He explained that I was in perfect health. He mentioned Dr. Adams's letter. He explained that my finances were in excellent order. He stated that I had recently updated my estate plan. Updated how? Jessica asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Your mother has established an irrevocable trust, Mr. Henderson said, looking directly at the camera. All of her major assets, including the house and her savings, have been transferred into this trust. There was a silence. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the street outside. Mark and Jessica just stared. Their lawyer shifted in his chair. And who is the beneficiary of this trust? He asked, his voice flat. Upon my death, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was clear and did not tremble. The entire contents of the trust will pass to Mr. David Miller and his family. Jessica's face went pale. Mark's turned a blotchy red. Who? Mark almost shouted. Who is David Miller? Is this a joke? David Miller is my mailman, I said simply. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I watched their faces. I saw confusion, then disbelief, then pure, hot anger. It was like watching a storm roll in over a calm sea. Her mailman? Jessica said, her voice a thin whisper. She looked at their lawyer, then at Mark. She's giving our house to the mailman? This is ridiculous, Mark exploded. She's obviously been taken advantage of. This is elder abuse. We'll contest this. We'll have her declared incompetent. I don't think you will, Mr. Henderson said calmly. He picked up a file. We have a full psychiatric evaluation, conducted last month, confirming your mother's competence. We have a paper trail of your own financial requests. We also have copies of certain emails. He paused. Including one from your son, Eleanor, asking if you had, and I quote, kicked the bucket yet. Mark flinched as if he'd been slapped. Jessica closed her eyes. The phrase hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. Their lawyer looked down at his notes, saying nothing. He knew. They had no case. I looked at my children on the screen. Their faces were no longer angry, just shocked and empty. They looked like strangers, and I realized, with a deep and final certainty, that they were. They had been for a long time. "The trust is legal, binding and final," Mr. Henderson said, closing the file with a soft thud. "Eleanor's wishes will be respected. This meeting is over." He reached out and closed the laptop. The screen went black. They were gone. The room was silent again, except for the slow, steady ticking of the old clock. I took a deep breath. The air felt clean. The weight that had been on my shoulders for years was finally completely gone. Mr. Henderson looked at me, his eyes kind. "Are you all right, Eleanor?" "Yes, George," I said, a small smile finding its way to my lips. "I am?" I stood up, smoothed my dress, and felt the cool weight of my mother's pearls against my skin. I was free. I never heard from Mark or Jessica again. No emails, no phone calls. The silence from Australia was vast and complete. At first I expected anger, more threats. But there was nothing. It was as if I had finally done what they'd asked. I had, in a way, kicked the bucket. The mother they knew, the one who was a bank and a house, was gone. Life became quiet and simple. Winter arrived, blanketing the town in soft white snow. I sat by my window, wrapped in the yellow sunquilt, and watched the flakes fall. I didn't worry about the driveway being ploughed. I didn't worry about getting groceries. I knew Dave would check on me. Kindness, I learned, was a more reliable thing than blood. One snowy afternoon, Dave knocked on my door. "Mrs. Gable," he said, holding his cap in his hands. "Mary and we heard about what you did. Your lawyer sent us a letter. We don't know what to say." His voice was thick with emotion. "There's nothing to say, Dave," I told him. "You're good people. You were there when I needed someone. That's all." I invited him in for a cup of coffee. We sat at my kitchen table and talked about his son's first semester at college. It was easy. It was right. In the spring, I sold the house. It was too big for me, filled with too many ghosts. Mr. Henderson handled everything. With the money, I bought a small, sunny condominium in a new building downtown. It had an elevator and a little balcony that was perfect for flower pots. The ladies from the quilting group helped me pack. We wrapped my good dishes in newspaper and told stories. They didn't ask about my children. They didn't need to. They just showed up, with boxes and tape and cheerful hearts. "A new start, Eleanor," Carol said, patting my shoulder. "Everyone deserves a new start." My new apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility. I arranged my familiar furniture. I hung the picture of my rose bushes on the wall. I put my husband's photo on my nightstand. It felt like home. My new building had a community room. I started a little book club there. Just a few of us at first. We met on Tuesdays, drank tea, and talked about the books we were reading. Sometimes we just talked about life. A gentleman named Arthur started coming. He was a retired history professor with a gentle smile and a wonderful laugh. He always brought cookies from the bakery downstairs. He would walk me back to my door after the meetings. "Eleanor," he said one evening, his hand resting lightly on my arm. "I very much enjoy our talks." "I do too, Arthur," I said. It was a simple, quiet beginning. A little warmth in the golden years. It was more than enough. One morning, I was sitting on my balcony, watering my geraniums. The sun was warm on my face. Below, the town was waking up. I could hear the distant sound of church bells. Mary Miller had called the day before. Michael had made the dean's list. They were so proud. I thought about the big house on the quiet lane. I thought about the pencil marks on the door frame. The memories were still there, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were like old photographs from someone else's life. My life was here now. in this small, sunny apartment, with the smell of coffee brewing in my kitchen, with good friends and blooming flowers, with the promise of a walk with Arthur later in the afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. It was a picture of a new quilt she was starting. The colours were bright and joyful. "Thought you'd like this," she wrote. I smiled. I took a sip of my coffee. The cup was warm in my hands. I looked out over the town, at the rooftops and the green trees. I felt a deep sense of peace. I had given away a house and some money, but I had gotten my life back. And it was a good life. A very good life indeed. And I was surprised to find it was completely true. The constant ache of disappointment I had carried for so long was gone. It had been replaced by something else. Something quiet and strong, like a deep-rooted plant. "I've learned that you have to tend your own garden first." He nodded, understanding. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the little green things grow. One Sunday, a few months later, I was leaving church. The bells were ringing, a joyful, familiar sound. David was waiting for me on the steps outside. I hadn't seen him up close in a long time. He looked better. He'd put on some weight, and his eyes were clearer. "Mum," he said. He didn't try to hug me or make a big show of it. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets. "I got a new job, back in accounting. It's a smaller firm, but I like it." "That's good to hear, David," I said. "And I've been volunteering," he said, looking at his shoes. "On Saturdays, at the food bank." He looked up and met my eyes. I wanted you to know." I nodded slowly. It wasn't an apology, not in words, but it was something. It was a start. "That's a good thing to do," I said. "They need the help." He gave me a small, hesitant smile. "Yeah, they do." He turned and walked away, and I watched him go. I felt a flicker of the old love, the deep mother love, but it was different now. It was quieter. It was from a distance. The years that followed were good ones,